Hey, welcome to Overtime, where we take Sunday's message further. My name is Jeremy, and I'm your host. And this is a podcast where we just want to ask the questions that we think that you would ask as it relates to Sunday's message. And as we do so, we hope that it helps you grow in your life and your faith. With that being said, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all of the podcasts that are coming out. Not only that, hit the like button, because when you do so, it helps us help other people. And if you ever have a question about Sunday's content or about Overtime, you can submit those to overtime@npaustin.com, and we will be sure to get to those in future podcasts. So with that being said, here's a quick recap of Sunday, and then we're going to jump into our conversation today.
I don't think there's a more powerful force to shape the direction and quality of your family than our words. The difference between happy and unhappy couples is the balance between positive and negative interactions. There's a very specific ratio that makes love last. That magic ratio is 5-1. In fact, the person I want to hear from is actually Jesus' brother. His name is James. He says, "My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry." He knows how powerful anger is. He says, because our anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. James says, guys, when it comes to your words, man, there's no more powerful force to determine the direction and quality of your family. If we're willing to apply this, then imagine what your home would be like.
Hey, did you watch Ted Lasso the new episode?
I did, but I was so dang tired.
Oh, you couldn't really engage with it?
So tired. I fell asleep like with 20 minutes left, and Jill woke me up, and she's like, "Babe, wake up."
Yeah. So I'm going to share something kind of vulnerable here.
That's risky.
I cannot, with you in this, what I'm about to share, it's very risky. I cannot watch movies where dogs die. Like, if there's like an inkling that like a dog might die,
Yeah.
like Ashley grabs the remote and fast forwards it because it just jacks with me.
Yeah.
Because I don't know, maybe traumatic memories of like my childhood best friend dogs dying and whatnot. But I get all really, really upset.
Yeah.
So the first like 5 minutes of Ted Lasso. Have you seen it, Josh?
I haven't seen it yet.
Oh, dang it.
It dog.
It's okay. I'm gonna watch. It's not like it's gonna ruin anything. It's the first episode.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. Well, dog died, right? When he kicked the ball and it hit the dog in the head.
Oh yeah, that was.
And I was like, my favorite show of all time does the very thing that I like hate the most in movies and TV shows, but they did it in like a very good way.
You
and
didn't
so it
see
didn't,
the dog die.
No, it didn't mess with me.
It inferred it.
Yeah, it didn't mess with me. But that was one thing. But there was a one-liner from the show that I loved. I'm going to make it a new programming rule. But Ted Lasso said, "Hey, don't bring an umbrella to a brainstorm." Thank you, Josh.
That was terrible.
I thought it was great. It's like, hey, don't like
Yeah.
stop the flow of the brainstorm. Like, let it go. Just let
Yeah.
it happen. Don't be one of those people that brings an umbrella to a
Don't
brainstorm.
be an umbrella man.
Yeah.
Okay.
It didn't connect with you the way it did me, did it?
Well, again, I was sleeping through most of it.
Yeah.
And then Jill kept going.
I love that.
Yeah.
It's good.
She kept bopping me.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. It was very nice.
But you know who I think Ted's gonna connect with?
Who?
The lady.
The
The
main
boss
lady?
lady.
Well, yeah, you got to watch episode 1 because that doesn't seem to be the case. But maybe
Really?
it is. Maybe it could be. I don't know.
I think that was like Jill's conclusion of episode 1.
Really?
I think so. Again, I was sleeping.
She's taller than him.
Much taller.
But then again, my wife's taller than me. So
She's like 6'9".
that lady?
No.
Or Ashley?
I'm being dramatic.
Okay. I thought you were serious.
Yeah.
Okay, so I do have a question for you.
Yeah.
In light of you talking about words this past Sunday, I wanted to know what is like the thing that people can say to you, the words that people say to you, Buck,
Yeah.
that just makes your heart go pitter patter, just fills you up like nothing else. You're like, man, when people say this, I feel like I'm at my top of my game.
Yeah.
What do people say to you? What's the compliment?
So there's two things that come to my mind. First,
Yeah.
Buck, you're sexy.
Oh gosh. How many we've talked about saying this on stage. This counts as that.
I told you two things. That is not true. That would
Okay.
make me feel awkward.
Okay.
And that must come from my wife.
Yes,
So
that's good.
yeah. So
Thank
that
you for
was
clarifying.
Yeah. So that as you were saying that, I was like, oh, that'd be funny. I don't know if it's funny.
Hysterical.
I don't know. So I've been in, you know, my story with counseling. There's a lot of stuff. I'm still
Yeah.
in process. One of the places I still am processing is how to receive things. So like, you know, kind of snapshot 5 years ago, 10 years ago, Buck, man, that was amazing. Oh, thank you. You're amazing.
Yeah.
Hey, Buck, thanks so much for doing. Oh, thank you. I would do that so fast. And so today, I think, like I shared, a friend of mine, somebody who's part of Northpoint, passed away recently. And when I was speaking at his memorial service, I said one of the most meaningful moment I ever had with this guy was just a few weeks ago after I didn't feel great about a teaching or what I was teaching on Sunday. I got off stage, and he came backstage, and he gave me a hug, which I'm was uncomfortable. But he said, "I am so incredibly thankful for you. You're an amazing teacher." And I thought, I received that.
Yeah.
It was emotional.
Yeah.
And so I think just like when it's genuine and authentic, and there's something about like, I'm thankful for you as a person.
Yeah.
I'm just thankful for like all of you.
Yeah.
That's probably one of the most meaningful things. Like, it's like almost like I said on Sunday, like in the movie Avatar, I see you. Although that's kind of weird.
Yeah.
But that was kind of the meaning behind it. Like, hey,
Yep.
with all of my heart, with my emotion, wow, I see you.
Yep.
And I'm grateful for you. I'm thankful for you. So
Yep.
I think if somebody said that, that's probably, in all honesty, the most meaningful thing.
Yeah. I totally didn't expect that. I thought you were gonna say something about your hair.
Oh yeah.
Like when somebody comes up
that
to
was
you
the
like,
sexy like category.
"Oh, okay.
Yeah, that
your
was
hair
like-
looks great, Buck."
Yeah.
I thought surely that just means the world to you. All the work you put into that.
I mean, look at it. There's not a lot of work in there.
I guess so.
It looks like a little bit of a, crazy man
Yeah.
sometimes. Especially, again, we've talked about this ad nauseum, how my hair's tall right now. So it's bothering me.
Yeah, about once every 6 weeks on the podcast when you need a haircut. That hits the topic probably.
Yeah, I did get a coupon in the mail, though, the other day from Cost Cutters by HEB, $6.99 for a haircut. Typically, I cut this, but I'm tempted to go there.
Yeah, that's enticing. $7, but you got to leave a tip.
Yeah. Yeah. Then you're debating, what do I tip?
Yeah, yeah,
Goes on $6. It's not a lot. But,
yeah. That's fair.
Anyways.
Okay, so first question is a little bit lighthearted in light of this past Sunday, Family Filters Part 2.
Yes.
Talking about the power of words, and we talked
So
about
powerful.
that whole scripture, do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, and that whole thing. And I love how you unpacked the different aspects of that. This first question is really just one that I think a lot of people have, especially when they're bumping into the church or Christians for the first time.
Sure.
And they're like, "Oh, am I allowed to say," it's like when you tell the stories of playing golf with people. It's like they say bad words and they cuss before they find out you're a pastor. And then once they find out you're a pastor, they like almost apologize for saying like a bad word.
Yeah.
Is it okay for cussing to happen? Is it okay for Christians to cuss?
I will speak as though I'm the Lord.
Yeah. And this is one of those like really silly questions.
Yeah.
Not going to get to the heart of, not going to spend a lot of time here.
Well, I mean, so I think just the way you phrased that made me laugh a little bit inside. Like, I'm the, God kind of sets the pace on what is and what is not.
Yeah.
So, in my opinion, I think cussing sometimes, when it comes to cussing, you got to think about this a little bit more. Cussing is meant to, if it's meant to insult, like I'm insulting you, if it's meant to harm, if it's vulgar, I think as you think more about the spirit behind the word, then yeah, of course that's sin, that's wrong. That's, Jesus' number one command is love one another as I have loved you. So if we're breaking that, then we're breaking God's command, by definition, sin.
Yep.
So I think if it's in that lane, yes. I think if it's like, hey, I'm mad at you, so I'm going to, cuss at you, or I'm mad at somebody, or it's meant to harm, it's meant to hurt, it's meant to, just tear down, yes.
Right.
I think that's a whole category of that would be wrong. And then I do think there's a whole nother category of just explanation. I'm explaining something. So there's debate on this, but I think it's in Philippians 3:7-8. Paul says, whatever was profitable to me in this world, now that I've come into a relationship with Jesus, I consider it, and literally in the Greek, it's the word dung, D-U-N-G. And there's a lot of debate on this, like in the ancient Greek, is this actually a cuss word because it seems as though? Can you find this in the ancient Greek? And so there's camps on this to say Paul said basically a cuss word there, and you would imagine if what the cuss word would be for dung, that he wanted to be as extreme as he could in that phrase to say it's like this. Everything compared to knowing Christ Jesus, my Lord, he said, is like this. Like that is how magnificent the gospel, the story, the person, the gift of Jesus Christ is. And so you would go, okay, well, if you're cussing in that context, I get it.
Yeah.
If you're cussing in the context to bring, a dramatic moment to save somebody, maybe that's completely appropriate.
Yeah.
I think it's, the thing I love about God and the thing I love about the Bible, the thing I love about Jesus, it's just so much after the heart. It's so much after the heart. And so, Paul on a number of occasions throughout the scriptures just talked about him as like, what a wretched man he is. He talked about some things. And if you trace back to the Greek again, you could create an argument to say, I think Paul was cussing a few times. And there's some theologians who would disagree with that.
Yeah.
So just to put that out there. So the long and short of it, I just think it goes back to the heart of the matter.
Yep.
And out of your heart, if you're cussing, because maybe you're trying to explain, and that's the best way to explain it, okay. If you're cussing because you're trying to get somebody's attention because they're in danger, and that's the best way to, perfect.
Yeah.
Or I guess the argument could be made if you're comparing Jesus to everything else.
Yeah.
Go ahead and cuss.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair.
I don't know. Yeah.
It's funny. I have so much respect for comedians who do a great job and don't cuss at all, because there's like the category of the ones who do, and it's just like, I don't know. It's just, I don't know. Maybe it makes things easier to be funny. Maybe that's something weird about our culture. But those comedians that just are clean and they can like make you roll on the floor laughing, so impressive.
Yeah, Brian Regan is that guy for me.
Yeah.
Jill got me some tickets to go see him, and I do think
he's hilarious.
He is funny, but here's the thing about cussing too, is I do think it takes extra brain power not to. It's almost like when my brain gets a little lazy, or my brain gets a little like, oh, it's just natural. Like I'm just gonna, but if I'm really thinking about my words, if I'm thinking about what I'm saying to you, and is this profitable? Like the whole scripture I used on Sunday, is this wholesome? Is this profitable and helpful to build you up according to your needs, which means I understand your needs, and will it benefit those that are listening? So am I going to be a stumbling block? Am I going to cause people around me to go like, oh my gosh, like, am I drawing them to Christ, or am I drawing them away from Christ?
Yeah.
So when you begin to really think about, you don't want to be over religious or over like dogmatic about this, but like the whole point is, if words are as powerful as we talked about on Sunday, I think we should think about them.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes when I get very flippant, or I get very, if I almost kind of think with my thoughts, like I'm not filtering much, it's almost like I get a little bit lazy with my thinking and my words. Yeah. Then, certainly it's easier to cuss.
Yep.
But I think if I'm being very intentional, which, maybe I just because I'm a pastor, I over spiritualize my thought here. But like for Brian Regan, I'm like, I think that's harder.
Yeah.
I think that's much harder.
Sure. Well, it says like out of the heart, the mouth speaks. And in terms of being intentional with your words, it means you're being intentional with your heart, which is generally a really good thing, regardless of whether or not you're saying a bad word or not. Just being intentional with your heart.
Well, I just don't think you're going to regret it too.
Yeah.
I mean, something Jill and I talk about a lot. It's like when we're making decisions or all that kind of stuff. I'm like, babe, 5 years from now, are you going to regret that? Are you going to regret taking your mom out to lunch? And I know you could do all these, but are you going to regret that?
Yeah.
And so I think with our words as well, it's like, hey, you can cuss, giddy up. And maybe there's the moment to make that point, and that's the most profitable thing to say in that moment. That may be true. But, is that moment, are you going to regret that? Yep. So, like, is there another word? Just use it.
Yeah. That's all fair. That was kind of a minor question. I've got more of a bigger one I want to kick us off with again. It is, you talked about that whole idea of taking every thought captive and submitting them to Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something I've heard you talk to me about for maybe a decade now, as long as I've known you. I mean, it's been a theme that you've mentioned, just, hey, what does it look like when you experience those things that come your way, or those thoughts or those temptations? Like, what does it look like to take those thoughts captive and just submit them to Christ? And so it's been something I've heard on the other side of you for a long time, but it's also something I've had to discover on how to like implement in my life. How would you describe taking thoughts captive in more of a practical sense?
Yeah. Yeah, I think, well, I would first say I'm still learning. How to do this, especially when the emotions are high and all that kind of stuff. But I've taught about this, but I think the most practical thing I could give, if you're listening or watching, is I heard this many years ago, but it's the whole idea of like saying, that there are voices in our head, there are voices in terms of with our thoughts. And if you were to boil down, look at all the scriptures, think about all your conversations you've had with people, think about all your personal thoughts. I think categorically there are 5 voices that kind of are informing our thoughts. There's God that inform our thoughts. There's Satan that inform our thoughts. There's the world that inform our thoughts. There's the flesh that inform our thoughts. And then there's your soul. And I think one of the greatest questions to actually practically take this and go, okay, I'm doing this on a daily basis, is to ask yourself the question. This is kind of weird because this is internal self-talk, but ask the question, whose voice is that? So as I have a thought, I'm like, hey, I have this thought about my son. I have this thought about my daughter. I have this thought about that person. I have this thought about Jill. I have this thought about you. And oftentimes I think, okay, I have this thought. What am I going to do with that? And my job is to go, okay, whose voice is that? Where'd that come from? And that's the beginning of a kind of a self-aware conversation that allows me to take those thoughts and begin to submit them to Christ. So, if it's an accusatory thought, if it's assume the worst thought, a lot of those thoughts. I mean, Jesus was the one who coined the phrase about Satan and said he's an accuser, he's a deceiver, he is a liar, he is a murderer. Like, that's who he is. So, like, if those kind of accusatory thoughts, or if those like, hey, that person, does this all the time, or, that kind of deceptive thought, like, hey, can I get away with this? Or, is this really a big deal? It's all of those thoughts to go, whose voice is that?
Yeah.
And oftentimes that's the beginning to say, okay, ultimately, Jesus, what does love require of me to do with this thought? Jesus, like, how did you handle this situation? Because you had to feel this betrayal. You had to feel this hurt. You had to feel this joy and excitement. You had to feel all of these things and have thoughts. How did you handle those? And that's the second part of the verse that Paul says, and taking your thoughts captive and submitting those, or making those obedient to Christ. And that's the question to go, what does love require me to do with these thoughts? So whose voice is this? That's very helpful to kind of deconstruct that thought, and then submitting it to Christ. What has he done with those kind of thoughts? Mm-hmm. And then ultimately inviting him in, Jesus, what would you have me do with this? How would you handle this? And then to go, what does love require of me? Then do it. And then, kind of the filters, what I said on Sunday, is the idea to go, if you can't let wholesome talk come out of your mouth that's profitable to build them up according to their needs, like if you don't know their needs, then don't speak. Like if you don't know what they need, like be curious. So understand their needs, understand what's going on, and then speak. Or if you wouldn't say it publicly, in a context to go, man, it's respectful, it's honoring, it's, even if it's a really hard conversation to have, and you're going to speak some things that they're not going to want to hear, but like, if the context is out and if it's public, can you say it in those ways? Because that's ultimately, I think, what it looks like practically speaking, once you submit your thoughts to Christ.
Yeah. Where do you think in families this plays itself out? Like you gave one example with the car and the grease. Mm-hmm. By the way, did you ever get the grease off the windows?
Oh yeah, yeah.
What did it take to get it?
Elbow grease.
Elbow. That's awesome.
It really did. It was just a lot of the glass cleaner, Windex. And
were you submitting more thoughts to Christ in that whole process?
Yeah. I mean, if you could have seen Jonathan's face that I shared on Sunday, and you saw the joy and how happy he was to do something for me, it was like, okay, whatever.
Yeah, that's fair. So apart from cars and grease, what are other family scenarios where you think it plays itself out to take our thoughts captive and make them obedient to Christ?
Yeah, I think, my oldest son, Sam, I mean, gosh, he's trying to figure out what to do in life. And I have a plan for him.
You know the answer.
But that's not my job as a father. My plan is to find his plan, for him to find his plan and to fuel that plan, and if I want to kind of separate from him relationally, then I need to project my plan on his life. That's what, like, as a dad, I mean, be careful with that, because as soon as you're like, okay, you're going to be this, and you're going to go to this school, and you're going to do this many things, well, hey, give him guidance until he discovers his plan.
Yeah.
But so that's taking a lot of my thoughts captive and going, okay, Buck, is this the wisest thing for you to say? Where does that come from? Wow, that comes from your flesh. I mean, that's super controlling. You just want to control yourself. So it's all those internal conversations that can feel a little bit psychotic. Like you're kind of going, I think I'm crazy. If somebody was listening to all these thoughts, but that's in parenting. And from that perspective, I think with Jill, there are times that I alluded to on Sunday, like she'll say something that I feel like is hurtful. It feels disrespectful. And it's capturing those thoughts to go, okay, my flesh wants to respond in a way to go, if you hurt me, I'm going to hurt you. Okay? Here's some words to hurt you.
Yep.
And so in a marriage, it's taking those thoughts captive and going, you know what? I know she's got to be hurt, and she's saying it because she's hurt. Or she may not know she's saying it the way she is. Or she may not be saying it the way I want her to say it. But she is saying something. And so let's take these thoughts that I have that I want to respond in certain ways captive and just be curious.
Yep.
And so, in a marriage perspective, financially, it's here's all my thoughts in a family. Here's what I want to do with all my money, and I say that like I have a ton, all my money.
Yeah.
All, the coins that are dropping.
You have 5 kids. We know you don't have any money.
I know, but it's like that idea to go, and, it's even taking those thoughts captive and go, where does that come from?
Yeah.
What do I want to do with that? Again, does that come from the world? Because the influences of culture say, hey, this is what you need to do with your money, and this is going to make you happy. Well, it's a rush of happiness, but then it fades, and then I got to chase it. So it's like taking those thoughts captive and, submitting those to Christ. And Christ was really specific on money, because he knew that it's the number one competition for your heart. And so he's like, okay. So, those are some of the thoughts that come to my mind. There's probably a whole lot of others, we could talk about. But
Sure. There's kind of a, as we were thinking about these questions, something came to mind. There's a different lens for like the same concept that I thought would be helpful to add to the conversation. And it's pretty recent for me because I read these 2 books this year, and I read them both, and then I was like, they wrote the same book, but they don't know it, or maybe they do know it, and they're kicking themselves. But Craig Groeschel wrote "Winning the War in Your Mind," and John Acuff wrote "Soundtracks," and they're both about thoughts, and they're both about taking thoughts captive. And a lot of what Craig Groeschel talked about, he said that our life moves in the direction of our strongest thought. So like if our thoughts are driving our actions, our beliefs, our decision making every single day, and when you kind of become a Christian, you're now taking the thoughts you used to have and you're submitting them to Christ, and you're trying to turn them into new thoughts. But there's all this kind of science to support that your brain changes over time, and it rewires itself in certain ways. So you can have a certain thought that is not Christ-like, for lack of a better term. And it's like a Grand Canyon has been formed in terms of this path that's been worn down over and over and over again in your brain because you've wired your brain to think this way. And he said part of following Jesus is like beginning to form a new path and beginning to stop going down that path in terms of whatever that thought might be. And in these 2 books, it just made me realize like how much Paul talks about thoughts. When you start to get in the lane of like thinking and thoughts and brain and mind, I did this when we were doing the In Your Head series early on this year, and it was all about head and mind and stuff like that. You see how many times he talks about thoughts. It's pretty surprising. In Romans, he says, those who live according to the flesh have their minds set on what the flesh desires, but those who live in accordance with the Spirit have their minds set on what the Spirit desires. And it's that like, I'm going to take these thoughts that were once fleshly thoughts and submit them to Christ, and now they're going to be Spirit thoughts. Even the don't conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Like that whole one too is this whole idea. I used to think this way, but in Jesus now I think this way instead. Yeah. And that's a process.
Yeah, I think, and that's one, I think, when it comes to a person's identity, it's huge.
Yeah.
It's huge.
Yeah.
Like your thought life. And on Acuff's book, we were talking a week or 2 ago
Yeah.
about the actual like science in it.
Yeah.
Like they did this big research thing, and I forgot the university, but I think it's the first couple chapters of his book, where they said, hey, they gave one group of people that didn't know what the other group of people was given, but they said, focus on these words. And it was everything about being old and being slow and being, all these kind of like words that were very reflective of like, hey, you're getting old, life is, and they gave this other group of people all these words that were very life-giving and energetic.
Yeah.
And they watched the behavior of these two individual groups. And those words began, they said people were walking slower. Like that's one of the things like there was tangible difference in a life as a result of words. And so if you're walking around all day long saying, I'm a loser, I'm ugly, I'm nothing, I'll never be forgiven, I'm a terrible person. Like I've even said on the other side of people go, I so deserve to die because of what I've done. I so deserve to die because of what I've done. Why am I here? Why am I here? Why am I here? Well, those thoughts shape so much of our actions.
Yeah.
And, versus, and that's where I would say, take that thought captive and ask the question, whose voice is that?
Yeah.
That feels like an accusatory voice. That feels like a deceptive voice. That feels like a lying voice, and that would be the voice of Satan.
Yeah.
And then, I think the voice of your Heavenly Father, when you become a Christian, you are a brand new creation. One of the coolest things about Christianity, you have a new identity. You are a brand new identity in Christ. You are forgiven. You really are past, present, and future. You are washed white as snow. From God's perspective, man, like sin has been dealt with. It has been paid for. You have a right standing with Him. Like, one of the things my counselor did with me early on, because I had so many bad thoughts about myself, was, every day for 30 days, I read Psalm 139. And one of the lines in there that David writes is, you are fearfully and wonderfully made. You are fearfully and wonderfully made. And I shared, a few weeks ago, like that's one of my routines when I wake up. I said, today is the day the Lord's made. I'm going to rejoice and be glad in it. And then my second thing I say, today is the day that, I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. That's who I am.
Yeah.
I am forgiven. His mercies are new every morning. I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. And then the third thing I say to myself all the time is, hey, today God's given you everything you need for life and godliness. Mm-hmm. Everything that's going to come your way. Hey, okay, God's prepared you. And when I sit there and I'm like, I have no words to say, what do I say in this moment? Hey, God knew that moment was going to come and He'll prepare me. Maybe I just need to sit there and say nothing. Mm-hmm. So identity on what you're saying. If somebody's listening, that's probably my number one conversation. And you could probably hear the energy because to me, I just wish, like in terms of if you're a follower of Jesus Christ, that every day of your life you could wake up and hear the voice of your Heavenly Father and what He has to say about your identity. If you did, that is life-giving. It is life-giving compared to the voice of the past, the voice of your father, the voice of your mother, the voice of the world, the voice of your flesh that just bombards you and weighs you down because they're accusing you of things that simply are not true of you any longer because you're a new creation in Christ.
Yeah. Well, even in the line of thinking about family and parenting specifically, I've heard you say that who you are does far more to parent your kids than what you say or what you do.
Yeah.
And it just seems like, imagine parents who got up every single day and looked in the mirror and said, like, I'm made in the image of God. I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. Imagine the worth and value that would ascribe to their kids because their kids now see them and the confidence and the security they have in Jesus.
Sure.
And that's powerful in terms of just family, like the value of the individual taking thoughts captive and making them obedient to Christ. What that does, not just for the individual, but what that does for a family can just be enormous.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah. And I think that quote is by Joseph Chilton, if I'm correct on that.
Yeah.
And I think he was a child psychologist, and he just said based on,
Yeah. And I know
bazillions of
Brene
hours.
Brown talks about it a lot too.
Yeah, she does as well. So
Yeah.
it's like who you are speaks far more than what you say. So like for you as a mom, for you as a dad, for you as a parent, it's so important to take your thoughts captive.
Yep. Yeah, and really quick going back, if anybody is looking if anybody's hearing Buck talk about this stuff and going, man, this is fantastic, that's exactly where I'm at, I'd encourage you to buy those two books. Go out and get Winning the War on Your Mind by Craig Groeschel, and maybe we can put these in the notes in the description and YouTube as well. And then Soundtracks by John Acuff. And if you're not a follower of Christ, you might like Soundtracks a little more, and if you're a follower of Christ, you might like Winning the War on Your Mind a little bit more. But both are just so helpful to take thoughts captive. So. Our next question, in light of kind of like you were talking about, standing in the mirror or whatever it is and telling yourself, hey, I'm fearfully and wonderfully made, because of the way that we are raised sometimes, the idea of this like positive, affirming words, both to ourselves, but also to our family, to our kids, to our sister, brother, parents, it feels awkward, a little bit uncomfortable sometimes to not just get rid of the bad, but add the good into our conversations. Why do you think feels awkward to us to engage in conversations that have this really like loving and positive vibe to them?
Yeah, I think, there's probably a lot of reasons. The things that hit my mind are, what you mentioned in the books. I think our neural pathways have been, shaped and formed to speak a certain way to ourselves. And if we've done that for years and years and years, that's foreign. So there's something foreign now coming into your mind that is not a habit, is not something you do, is not something you have a hard time believing it because you've sowed so deeply these negative thoughts in your mind. And so I think that's one aspect that makes it hard. It's new. I think new, anytime something's new, like, hey, it's the first time I've swung a golf club. It's the first time I've danced, because I don't dance a lot. But if I get out there on the floor, like, man, I haven't danced in 10 years. It's new. It's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Anything new by the very nature of new oftentimes provides a discomfort. So I think if it feels uncomfortable to you and you're listening or watching, it's okay. That's normal. I mean, just think of anything new categorically. This is new. Okay, well, that's uncomfortable. So I think feel that way. I also think there's a sense of vulnerability. I think the idea to be vulnerable enough to admit maybe this thought and these words haven't been best for me, haven't been best for my marriage, haven't been best for my sons or daughters, my kids. It's hard to admit that.
Yeah.
And I think then the idea to be vulnerable and go, I'm going to try something different again. The newness is there. Your neural pathways have been shaped. I think that dynamic is at play. There's a vulnerability in that. There's a humility in that. And I think, my counselor always says, Buck, when you're sick and tired of being sick and tired, then you'll do something different. Because, I'm so hard-headed and prideful and stubborn. And, it's like, okay, when I get almost hit rock bottom, then I'm like, okay, I'll try it.
Yeah.
I got to beat myself up for so long and then come to the conclusion, this is not the way forward. Then when you are sick and tired of being sick and tired, then do something different. And, then when you do, there's a vulnerability to that. There's like, okay. And so I think that makes it hard. And, the thing I don't want to communicate is that, like, I tried to say this. I think I said it on Sunday second service where I was like, it's not rainbows and ice cream. And I don't know why I said that. So this is not the idea that you
isn't the term rainbows and butterflies?
Probably.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this is not like, hey, you don't deal with reality, you don't deal with truth, because that is like, if you're listening and you're like, oh, Buck, this is just, preacher talk or spiritual talk, or this is what I don't like about the church. They don't deal with what's true. Are you kidding me? My goodness, like, that has been my life. I've lived in truth for 34 years. And I'm just telling you, there's a huge value to that. But there is a huge deficit to that as well. Yeah. And the deficit is, man, you can beat people up with truth. You can write your way right out of the most important relationships because you're camped on truth. And it's like, but this is what I did in my past, and it's terrible, and I'm a terrible human being. Okay, yes, this is why Jesus had to die. This is why he gave his life on the cross, and this is why he rose from the dead to give you a gift. And if you're willing to receive that gift and do something different and vulnerable, there is something that you can take the truth of what you've done in the past and take the greater truth of what Jesus has done, and that is a beautiful thing to go, okay, this is not about, butterflies and rainbows. This is about truth, and it's the truth of what Jesus Christ says of you and what God says of you. And man, I love what Jesus says. Those truths can set you free. And I think we want to experience freedom in our life. So yes, deal with the reality of what your kids are doing. Deal with the reality of what's happening in your marriage. Deal with the reality of what you're doing in your past. But take those thoughts captive, submit them to Christ, and Jesus has a much better reality and a much better truth that'll set you free. And that is our job, to be disciplined, to be intentional, to go find that truth. It's a greater truth. It's a better truth. Yeah. So, those of you that are listening that you go, oh, Buck, you're just trying to make everything so. No, I mean, deal with the whole thing. I'm just trying to point you to a better truth.
Yeah. And to piggyback off last week's podcast, Jesus was all about truth and grace.
Sure.
You know,
Yeah.
and so if the people who are all truth, all truth, all truth all the time, well, that's where you damage relationships and you hurt people, and you know, so.
Yeah, but I'm telling you, if you can get to the greater truth and tell yourself every single day, man, I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. Today, God's mercies are new every single morning. Man, I screwed it up big with my kids, yesterday.
Yeah.
I can't believe I said those things. Guess what? You're forgiven. That's a greater truth.
Yep.
Guess what? Today, you are a new creation. That's a greater truth. You are forgiven. That's a greater truth. And God has called you to go do something to reconcile what you did for yesterday. So
Yeah.
go do it.
Yeah.
It's life-giving.
Yeah, I think it's important to know that too. When I feel like I'm trying to trade a lie for a truth, so I'm feeling this way, and this is the negative thought, trying to replace it with a positive thought. Sometimes I feel like I'm just putting my head in the sand. You know, I'm just showing like, oh, I'm trying to pretend like the world is rainbows and butterflies. I think but part of the submitting a thought captive and making it obedient to Christ process is like feeling those things, processing those things, working with those things, and then just choosing something different. And that like choice, you know, I'm making a head choice, but I want my heart to follow. That choice is really that like submission. I've taken it captive and I'm submitting it. I'm not putting my head in the sand. You know what I mean?
100%.
Did you have anything to add on that one?
No, yeah, I agree.
Okay.
I think that was wise, Jeremy.
Oh, thank you, Buck.
Wise.
Yeah, you probably taught me that at some point.
No, I did not know. That is, that's the Lord.
Last question. Sometimes we find ourselves trying to be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to anger, but man, we just can't do it. You know, we find ourselves seeing yellow and then seeing red. And when we're in those seeing red moments, it's just like, until I calm down emotionally, like there's no filter. It's all coming out, you know. Even if we're hearing this slow to speak, you know, all that kind of stuff, and we're trying to begin to filter our words with our families, but we just find ourselves in that emotional turmoil all the time, and willpower alone isn't cutting it. What would you say to those people who are listening?
Well, if I heard the question right,
you might not have. I might not have been clear.
no, I think, I thought you were good, but you know, maybe I wasn't quick to listen as you were speaking. But here's what I would say, and it alludes to what you just said. You know, hey, I feel this. This is my reality. I know this is true, but I'm having a hard time, and it feels like I'm putting my head in the sand. If you find yourself in a place to go, like, I'm doing everything that it feels like Jesus has asked me to do, that the preachers asked me to do, that the church has asked me to do, that the Bible's asked me to do, and I'm hustling doing that, and I still feel like worthless. I still feel like my identity is deeply in question. Or the question I think you asked, that was, if you're doing all these things, but yet I still am exploding on my kids. I still am saying those things I shouldn't say to my spouse, to people in my family. That is a real reality, and I think, like, I don't know, 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, I spoke to that. And I said I was chasing and chasing and chasing, and I was memorizing more scripture than you can imagine, reading the Bible every single day, praying like it's going out of style. I was fasting before the Lord. I was, learning more theology and doctrine. That, I was just like, I'm just going to outwork it. I'm doing all the right things. But yet I still felt so dang empty on the inside. And it was getting all over my family. Well, that was kind of my impetus to go to counseling. Mm-hmm. Like, I couldn't figure it out. I needed some help. You know what Solomon says in Ecclesiastes, 2 are better than 1. Well, I thought I could outwork it, outpace it, outsmart it, out whatever. And I got to the place to go, no, I need help. And so if you find yourself in that place as I just described, and as the question you just asked, I would highly, highly, highly recommend sitting down with one of our pastors here on staff and going, I'm stuck. Mm-hmm. And if you're stuck, you need new information. And sometimes that new information is more about you than about, some philosophy or, about
some 3 steps or
right,
whatever.
Some 3 steps. It's more about the condition of your heart. Because what I ran into is there were things that were deep in my heart that I stuffed and stuffed and stuffed and stuffed. And they just were coming out of me, like you alluded to. Out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. Out of the overflow of the heart, the mind thinks. Out of the overflow of the heart, we act. Mm-hmm. That's what Jesus taught us. So if it keeps overflowing to a place that we're like, dang it, did it again, or dang it, I feel so low, I feel so hopeless, then that's the time to go, hey, I need to step out of what I'm doing and go submit myself to somebody else that I can trust.
Yeah.
And that's where, pastors are called shepherds. I mean, the biblical definition is they're going to shepherd you through that. And that's the role that a pastor should be able to play and walk with you, meet you, empathize, hear you, listen to you, and help you take some steps. But oftentimes pastors maybe have a biblical knowledge and can help you in terms of biblical guidance, but maybe you need to go now to a professional who's somebody who's dealing with the emotional side of things, somebody who's dealing maybe with a physiological side of things, chemical imbalances. And, pastors can help you spiritually, but on the emotional side, maybe they can empathize and give you some direction. On the physical side, maybe they can empathize and give you some direction, but that's where a counselor can step in and say, hey, let's talk about what your dad did. Let's talk about, the things that you say, I don't remember much of my childhood. There's a reason why. Mm-hmm. And a counselor, a good one, it's like there's good restaurants, bad restaurants, good doctors, bad doctors, good counselors, bad counselors. A good one can begin to unpack and pull back the layers of your heart. And what I would recommend is a Christian counselor can begin to rebuild and help you re-engineer your heart and add the layers of Jesus Christ on that. And that's a beautiful thing, to be re-engineered from the inside out with the truths that are the greatest truths of Christ that will set you free and rebuild what happened to you when you were young, the choices you made, the experiences you've had. Deal with those, because those are probably coming out of you, and that's why you keep saying that. That's why you keep doing that. That's why you keep feeling that. So that would be my recommendation. Maybe start with a pastor, start with maybe a small group leader, and then eventually maybe it's time to go to a counselor, and a professional counselor who I would recommend loves the Lord. If they don't love the Lord, I'm sure they have there's great insights and truths. I mean, I've sat on the other side of counselors that are agnostics and atheists, and man, they have some great insights. I'm not saying at the exclusion of, but I just think the beauty of somebody who loves the Lord is they can begin to layer on the truths of Christ versus just, kind of these worldly things, or, hey, just have this positive thought because the universe tells you. No, there's a God who knows you, and a God who can empathize, who sent his son for you because you have so much value, who wants to give you truth that will re-engineer you from the inside out so you can experience something even more beautiful in life.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a great way to end the podcast. And I'll just add on there too. I think a lot of times people, it's the same thing with that uncomfortable place. They don't want to jump into that counseling thing, but sometimes feeling stuck means you got to go back in order to go forward. And what's at stake, not to get dramatic, but what's at stake is our families. And if it means it costs, a little bit of money to try it, and if it means we have to get a little bit uncomfortable, but it changes our family dynamic, it changes our kids' lives, then, man, I think that's worth it.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
100%. And I'll just speak, I've shared this publicly, and I even had a conversation with Sam this week, because Sam, the first 10 years of his life, I just poured so much of my flesh into him, so much shame and so much my control and so much my direction, and he had to be perfect because I'm a pastor, and my reputation was more important than my relationship with him. And he felt that.
Yeah.
And so there was an impact. But over the last 8 years or so, he has felt the other side of that. And he's still in the navigational to go like, am I really trusting you, Dad? But I'm just telling you what I've experienced on the other side of that, which the catalyst between the 10 years and the 8 years, the difference is counseling for me is it's so much more life-giving. It was hard as hell, so that's an appropriate place to cuss. It was hard as hell to go there. Felt like dark nights to go to counseling. I didn't want to go, but it has set my relationships free as a father. It has set Jill and I free in our marriage. It has set me free to pastor people more, and I haven't arrived. I've got a long ways to go, but I'm just telling you, it's just something greater in life to experience. And so your words are very, very true. There is something on the other side of being willing to do that is so much greater.
Yeah. And I'll just add on there, if anybody wants to look for counseling resources, you can go to our homepage, npaustin.com, click on what's next, and you'll find our Find a Counselor page right there. You might have to scroll down or filter the options, but it's right there. And there's a ton of great counseling resources that we have in different counseling centers that we have partnered with, or we love if you're looking for a good Christian counselor. So go to our homepage, hit what's next, and then go from there, and you'll be able to find a counselor to give a call. So Buck,
awesome.
Thank you so much for being on here for part 2. I mean, you're kind of here every week, but thanks so much again for being here.
Giddy up.
And we'll be back for part 3 next week.
Sounds great.